There's a video that went viral for all the wrong reasons. A Filipino woman, standing in front of a camera, speaking with an accent that made people laugh. The comments were brutal, thousands of them. They mocked the way she spoke. They questioned how she got the job. They said she didn't belong on American television. Some comments were so cruel they can't even be repeated here. But here's what those people didn't know. That woman they were laughing at, she would go on to become one of the most trusted voices in American journalism. She would report from war zones where bullets flew past her head. She would interview presidents and dictators. She would win awards that most journalists only dream about. And the same people who mocked her accent would one day hang on her every word, waiting to hear what she had to say about the biggest stories in the world. This is the story of how a girl from Manila who was told she would never make it in American media became CNN's secret weapon. And trust me, by the end of this story, you'll understand why her journey matters more than you think. Let's go back to the beginning. Not to the viral video, not to CNN, but to a small neighborhood in Manila where a little girl named Maria grew up in a house that was always filled with noise. Her father was a taxi driver who worked 16-hour shifts just to keep food on the table. Her mother sold vegetables at the local market, waking up at 4 in the morning every single day, even on her birthday, even when she was sick. They lived in a 2-room house with walls so thin you could hear the neighbors arguing about money, which happened almost every night. Maria shared a bed with her 2 younger sisters. They had one electric fan that barely worked. During the hot season, which felt like it lasted forever, they would lie awake at night, sweating, dreaming about a better life. But Maria's parents had something that poverty couldn't take away. They had hope and they had a plan. Every night, after dinner, Maria's father would sit with her and practice English. He had an old, beaten-up English dictionary that he bought from a street vendor for almost nothing. The pages were yellow and some were falling out, but to him, it was treasure. He would point to words and make Maria repeat them. Over and over, her pronunciation wasn't perfect. How could it be? She was learning English in a country where Tagalog was spoken everywhere. But her father would say something that Maria would remember for the rest of her life. He would say, "Your accent doesn't matter. What matters is that you have something important to say." Maria was a curious kid. While other children played in the streets, she would sit by the window and watch people. She would make up stories about where they were going, what they were thinking, what secrets they were keeping. Her mother noticed this and bought her a small notebook from the market. It cost almost nothing, but to Maria, it was everything. She started writing down the stories she imagined. Stories about the old woman who walked past their house every morning at exactly 6 o'clock. Stories about the street vendor who always smiled, even though Maria knew he was struggling. Stories about her own family and their dreams of something bigger. When Maria was 12 years old, something happened that changed everything. There was a fire in their neighborhood. It started in the middle of the night and spread fast. Maria woke up to her mother screaming. The smoke was so thick she could barely see. Her father grabbed her and her sisters, and they ran outside in their pajamas. They stood in the street and watched their house burn. Everything they owned turned to ash in less than an hour. The dictionary her father treasured, the notebook where Maria wrote her stories, the few photographs they had of happier times, all gone. They had nothing. They moved in with Maria's aunt, who lived in an even smaller house across the city. Maria had to change schools. She went from a school where she had friends and teachers who knew her name to a school where she was just another poor kid who lost everything in a fire. The other students looked at her like she was invisible. During lunch, she would sit alone because she couldn't afford to buy food from the canteen. She would pretend she wasn't hungry, but her stomach would growl so loud she was sure everyone could hear it. But something interesting happened during this dark time. Maria's new school had a library. It was small and most of the books were old and damaged, but it became Maria's escape. She would go there every day after classes and read everything she could find. She read about journalists who traveled the world and told important stories. She read about reporters who gave voice to people who had no voice. She read about women who broke barriers and did things everyone said were impossible. And slowly, a dream started forming in her mind. A dream that seemed absolutely crazy for a girl who had nothing. She wanted to become a journalist, not just any journalist. She wanted to work for an international news organization. She wanted to tell stories that mattered. When Maria told her father about this dream, he didn't laugh. He didn't tell her to be realistic. He looked at her with tears in his eyes and said, "Then we start working toward that dream today." They were living in his sister's house. He was still driving a taxi. They were still struggling to eat 3 meals a day, but he believed in her. And that belief became the fuel that kept Maria going. Maria threw herself into her studies like her life depended on it. Because in a way it did. She woke up at 4 in the morning to study before school. She stayed up late doing homework by candlelight when the electricity was cut off because they couldn't pay the bill. She joined the school newspaper, even though the other students made fun of her for being too serious. She wrote articles about problems in their community, about the lack of clean water, about students who dropped out of school because they had to work, about families living in poverty that no one wanted to talk about. Her articles made people uncomfortable. The school principal called her into his office and told her to write about happier things. But Maria refused. She had found her voice, and she wasn't going to stay quiet. When Maria was 16, she entered a national essay competition about journalism and social change. Thousands of students from all over the Philippines participated. Maria wrote about her experience losing everything in the fire, and how it opened her eyes to the struggles of people living in poverty. She wrote about the power of journalism to shine a light on injustice. She wrote with a passion that came from living the reality she was describing. And she won first place. The prize was a scholarship to one of the best universities in Manila. This was Maria's ticket out, her chance to make the dream real. She studied broadcast journalism at the university. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the poorest person in the room. She was surrounded by students from wealthy families who had cars and new clothes and never worried about where their next meal would come from. They had connections. Their parents knew people in the media industry. They had internships lined up before they even graduated. Maria had was hunger. Not just physical hunger, though there were still days when she skipped meals to save money, but a hunger to prove herself, a hunger to succeed, a hunger to make her parents' sacrifices mean something. During her time at university, Maria worked 3 part-time jobs. She tutored younger students in English. She worked at a call center on weekends. She wrote articles for a small online publication that paid almost nothing. She barely slept. Her classmates would go out to parties and clubs, and Maria would be working or studying. Some of them felt sorry for her. Others thought she was weird, but Maria didn't care. She had a goal, and nothing was going to stop her from reaching it. In her final year of university, Maria applied for an internship at a major Filipino news network. She was competing against hundreds of other students, most of whom had better connections and came from better schools. But Maria had something they didn't have. She had a portfolio of real stories. Stories about real people facing real problems. When she went in for her interview, the news director looked at her work and asked her a question. He said, "Why do you want to be a journalist?" And Maria didn't give him some rehearsed answer about truth and integrity. She told him the truth. She said, "Because I know what it's like to be invisible. I know what it's like when no one tells your story. And I want to make sure that people who feel invisible know that someone sees them." She got the internship, and she was brilliant at it. She worked harder than anyone else. She volunteered for assignments that no one wanted. She would go into dangerous neighborhoods to get stories. She would interview people that other reporters ignored. She had a gift for making people trust her, for getting them to open up and share their truth. Within 6 months, they offered her a full-time position as a junior reporter. Maria was 22 years old, and she was officially. For the next 5 years, Maria built a reputation as one of the most fearless reporters in the Philippines. She covered natural disasters, political corruption, poverty, crime. She went to places where other reporters refused to go. She told stories that made powerful people angry. She received threats. People told her to stop digging into certain stories or she would regret it. But Maria kept going. She had spent her whole life being underestimated, being told she didn't belong, being treated like she didn't matter. She wasn't about to let fear stop her now. But Maria had a bigger dream. She wanted to work internationally. She wanted to report on global stories. She wanted to work for CNN or BBC or Al Jazeera. She wanted to prove that a girl from a poor neighborhood in Manila could stand on the world stage. So she started applying. She sent her resume and her portfolio to every major international news organization she could think of. She got rejected. Over and over and over again. The responses were always polite but firm. "Thank you for your interest, but we're looking for someone with more international experience." Or, "We're looking for someone who fits our current needs." She knew what they really meant. They didn't think a Filipino reporter with an accent would connect with an international audience. Maria was 27 years old when she got an email that would change her life. CNN was looking for reporters to join their international team. They were specifically looking for journalists from different parts of the world who could bring diverse perspectives to their coverage. Maria applied, not really believing anything would come of it. But this time, something different happened. They called her for an interview, then another interview, then another. They flew her to their headquarters in Atlanta. They tested her on camera. They gave her sample stories to report. And then, after weeks of waiting that felt like years, they offered her a position. Maria was going to work for CNN. She was going to be an international correspondent. The girl who grew up in a 2-room house with walls so thin you could hear the neighbors fighting was going to report news to millions of people around the world. Her parents cried when she told them. Her father held that old dictionary. one that was placed after the fire. He said, "I told you your accent doesn't matter. I told you what matters is having something important to say." Maria moved to the United States. It was terrifying and exciting and overwhelming all at once. She had never lived outside the Philippines. She had never been away from her family for more than a few days. Everything was different. The food, the weather, the way people talked, the way they looked at her. She was assigned to cover international stories, which meant she would travel constantly. She would go wherever the news was happening. And for the first few months, everything seemed to be going well. She was working hard, proving herself, building relationships with her colleagues. And then came the assignment that would make her famous for all the wrong reasons. There was a developing story about a humanitarian crisis in a Southeast Asian country. CNN needed someone to report from the ground, and they chose Maria. It made sense. She understood the region. She spoke multiple languages. She had experience covering difficult stories. Maria flew out immediately and spent 2 weeks reporting from refugee camps, interviewing families who had lost everything, documenting the crisis that the world wasn't paying enough attention to. She filed her reports every day. She spoke to camera, explaining the situation, sharing the stories of the people she met, calling for international action. Her reports were powerful and moving, but when they aired on CNN, something unexpected happened. People started focusing on the wrong thing. They weren't talking about the humanitarian crisis. They weren't talking about the families who needed help. They were talking about Maria's accent. They were talking about the way she pronounced certain words. They were talking about how she looks different from the typical CNN reporter. Comments started appearing online. At first, there were just a few, then dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. People were making fun of the way she spoke. They were creating memes using clips of her reports. They were questioning how CNN could hire someone who couldn't even speak English properly. The comments were cruel and personal and relentless. Some people said she was hired just to fill a diversity quota. Others said she was an embarrassment to CNN. Some comments were racist and hateful in ways that are too ugly to repeat. Maria saw all of it. Every comment, every meme, every cruel joke. She would lie in her hotel room at night, in a country torn apart by crisis, and read comments from people who had never met her, who knew nothing about her, who had decided she didn't deserve to be where she was. And for the first time since she was a little girl watching her house burn down, Maria felt completely broken. She questioned everything. Maybe she didn't belong on American television. Right. Maybe her accent was too strong. Maybe she should just go back to the Philippines and give up on this dream. She called her father from that hotel room, crying so hard she could barely speak. She told him about the comments, about the mockery, about how she felt like a failure. And her father, this man who had driven a taxi for 16 hours a day to give his daughter a chance at a better life, said something that Maria would carry with her forever. He said, "They're not laughing at your accent. They're uncomfortable because you're showing them a mirror. You're showing them parts of the world they don't want to see. You're telling stories about people they want to ignore. And you're doing it while being exactly who you are, without apologizing, without pretending to be someone else. That makes them uncomfortable. So they attack the easiest thing, your accent. But your accent is not your weakness. It's proof of how far you've traveled. It's proof of how hard you've worked. Don't you dare let them take that away from you." Maria hung up the phone and made a decision. She wasn't going to quit. She wasn't going to hide. She wasn't going to try to change her accent or be someone she wasn't. She was going to keep doing her job, and she was going to do it better than anyone else. She was going to make it impossible for people to ignore her work. The next day, Maria went back out into the field. She interviewed more families. She documented more stories. She reported with even more passion and dedication than before. She didn't change a single thing about the way she spoke. When her reports aired, the cruel comments continued. But something else started happening too. Other people started speaking up. Journalists from around the world, many of them also from countries where English wasn't the first language, started defending Maria. They shared their own experiences of being mocked for their accents. They talked about the double standard in international journalism, where reporters were expected to cover the whole world, but were criticized if they didn't sound like they were from America or Britain. More importantly, people started actually listening to what Maria was saying, instead of how she was saying it. Her reports about the humanitarian crisis started getting attention from human rights organizations. Her interviews with refugees were being shared by advocacy groups. The stories she was telling were making a real impact. Donations started flowing to relief organizations. Politicians started asking questions. The crisis that had been ignored was suddenly on everyone's radar. And it was because of Maria's reporting. But Maria's real test was still coming. 6 months after the viral mockery, CNN assigned her to cover a breaking news story. There had been a terrorist attack in a European city. Multiple casualties. The situation was still developing. The was chaotic and dangerous. It required a reporter who could handle intense pressure. CNN sent Maria. Some people at the network questioned the decision. They worried that the online backlash would continue. They worried that viewers wouldn't take her seriously. But Maria's editor believed in her. He had seen her work. He knew what she was capable of. Maria arrived in the city while smoke was still rising from the attack site. She went straight to the scene, even though it wasn't completely secure. She started reporting immediately, speaking to witnesses, gathering information, piecing together what had happened. Her reports were clear, factual, and passionate. She interviewed survivors with a sensitivity that made them feel safe sharing their trauma. She spoke to first responders who were still shaken from what they had witnessed. She provided context and analysis without speculation. She did everything a great journalist is supposed to do. And this time something different happened. People weren't talking about her accent. They were talking about her reporting. They were praising her professionalism under pressure. They were sharing her interviews because they were powerful and important. Major news outlets were citing her reports. Other journalists were complimenting her work. The narrative was shifting. Slowly but surely, Maria was being recognized not as that reporter with the accent, but as a damn good journalist who happened to have an accent. But Maria wasn't satisfied with just being accepted. She wanted to be undeniable. She wanted to be so good at her job that no one could question whether she belonged. So she kept pushing herself. She volunteered for the most difficult assignments. When there was a story in a war zone, Maria raised her hand. When there was a story in a remote location with dangerous conditions, Maria said she would go. When there was a story that required weeks of investigation and digging, Maria did the work. She covered the refugee crisis in the Middle East, spending months in camps, documenting the stories of families fleeing war. She reported from conflict zones in Africa, often the only international journalist willing to go to certain areas. She investigated corruption in South America, following money trails and interviewing whistleblowers who risked their lives to talk to her. She covered natural disasters. That's how Maria transformed from a mocked local reporter to CNN's most respected voice. Her journey shows that talent, determination, and believing in yourself can break through any barrier, softly. Stories like Maria's aren't just about one person. They're about all of us. Every Filipino has a story of courage waiting to be told. Some are fighting in newsrooms, some in small businesses, some in their communities. These are the stories we love sharing on Philippines Wealth Chronicles. Our channel isn't just about watching, it's about getting inspired. Each video is like a blueprint of how ordinary Filipinos do extraordinary things. Maybe you're dreaming of your own breakthrough, or you just love hearing about real people beating the odds. Either way, we've got stories that will make you believe in yourself. If Maria's journey touched you, there are so many more. Just click subscribe, and you'll be part of our community of dreamers and doers. See you in the next